Good evening and welcome. My name is Anthony Orlando. I'm the Assistant Dean of Law School Admissions at Western New England University School of Law. Welcome everybody to our social justice lawyering webinar, actually now Zoom meeting, if you will. Thanks everybody for your flexibility and for sticking with us. I just wanted to kick off this great event this evening by introducing Dean Setti for some welcoming remarks before turning things over to Ariel Clemmer, our director for the Center for Social Justice. So Dean Setti.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome you this evening. Thanks for your flexibility and adaptability of moving formats and modalities with us. My job here is very short and also very upbeat because I get to talk to you for just 1 minute about how excited I am about the social justice lawyering work that goes on at the law school. And this holds true for the amazing work that goes on at the Center for Social Justice. It holds true for our clinics, for externships, and for lots of other opportunities that we have for pro bono work, summertime, funded work through the law school, and the ways in which the law school looks to support students who are looking to launch a career in social justice lawyering or simply explore a career in that direction. I think this is going to be a terrific evening where you get to meet some of our wonderful faculty and administrators who do amazing work in this field. And I welcome you and look forward to a good evening. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Dean Setti. I just wanted to encourage everybody, if you have any questions during the presentation, if you wanted to type those using the chat feature. And then at the end of Ariel's interview with our panelists, we'll be able to get to those questions in the chat feature. But I will turn things over for now to our director for the Center for Social Justice, Ariel Clemmer.
Great, thanks so much, Anthony. I'm just gonna make you the host here.
Okay.
Great, okay. Perfect, can everybody hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. Well, welcome. I'll echo the sentiments that have been said so far. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you hopping on and being flexible. You know, that's something that actually happens all the time in my job. So it's not something we anticipated happening, but, you know, kind of being able to go with the flow really does go hand in hand with social justice. I'm sure the faculty that are on the call with me today and our other administrators will agree. So tonight's event, you're going to hear about the Center for Social Justice's work, various faculty initiatives, and also different opportunities for student work in the social justice arena. As Anthony said, I'm the director here at the Center for Social Justice, which works to advance justice through research, education, advocacy, innovation, and public engagement. And I just want to also thank everyone who worked hard to put tonight's event together, including our great admissions staff, which is Rachel and Anthony Orlando, as well as Dean Setti and the great faculty members and law students that you're going to hear from tonight. You should have seen a button pop up that lets you know that this is being recorded. So just make sure that you're aware of that. And as Anthony said, if you have any questions throughout, please just put them in the chat box and we'll try to get to as many as we can tonight. So a little bit about the Center for Social Justice. It was launched in 2019 and has actually accomplished a tremendous amount in its first year. The Center for Social Justice exists as a hub for the law school's justice-related teaching, scholarship, and service. We do a lot of different things. Some of those are broadening social justice academic offerings, helping students who aspire to be social justice lawyers and accomplishing those goals. We try to imbue a culture of pro bono volunteerism among our faculty, students, staff, and others within the legal profession. We manage a number of different in-house pro bono projects, which you'll hear about more tonight. We also work closely with our partners and our community members to identify and address unmet legal needs that require sort of multi-dimensional work that cuts across both the law and other legal fields, other fields. So as you heard, we do this and we effectuate our mission in sort of 5 key areas. One is research, and that includes sort of identifying the root causes of systemic social injustice and trying to design actionable client-centered projects that get at the roots of the issues. We do this through education. We have our faculty members have nationally recognized scholarship in their fields, and they help to develop resources and enrich the educational and practical opportunities for students. In terms of advocacy, we work to, as I said, identify what those legal needs are in our community that are not currently being addressed and try to figure out the ways that we can get involved and intervene on both local, national, and global issues. In terms of innovation, we have a new founded commitment to innovation, which is to work toward creative solutions. We do this right now in areas like consumer rights and innovation to technology. And in terms of public engagement, we're sort of all the time hosting different conversations with and for the community, engaging around social justice, know your rights kind of events, and other public information campaigns. So I just thought I would talk a little bit about some of the current projects that we have that you might be interested in. One is that we run a racial justice court project. We're working with the local public defender's office to explore issues of racially disparate sentencing outcomes in our community. So we're planning a project right now. It's still in the planning phase, but we're working with a number of data scientists and social scientists and the local public defender organization to design this initiative that's going to examine what the race of the defendants were in a particular number of cases here, and then look at what the outcomes of those cases were, what the sentence ultimately was that the person received. Also looking at what the district attorney recommended and what kinds of information we can glean from that. And we're hoping to get some evidence that can then be used by advocates in our local court system for change. Another one of our projects is the Consumer Debt Initiative. This is a lawyer for the day, free legal service pro bono program that represents consumers who have credit card collection actions in the Springfield District Court. We got involved in this work because there are a shocking number of people in our community that are facing consumer debt problems. The number across the state is something like 1/4 of all people have a debt in collection. In Springfield, specifically our Hampden County, that number grows on average to about 30% of the population. But when you break it down by race, it turns out that over 50% of households in communities of color have a debt in collection. And so this is a really tremendous both economic justice initiative and racial justice initiative where we actually intervene. We become sort of like agitators in the system. We go in and we try to make sure that the collection companies that are seeking to collect on these debts are actually doing so in a legal way, and that people are informed of their legal rights and know how they can advocate for themselves. We also do advocate for them. We'll show up, we'll do hearings, negotiate with the debt collectors, and overall it's a terrific experience. I've had at least anywhere from 2 to 4 students every single week for the last several weeks showing up in virtual court with me because it is now all being done online. But it's a really great opportunity to get involved and to have real client experience on the ground. A couple other things that we're doing is we know that now, because of COVID-19, access to technology has become one of the greatest access to justice barriers of our time. And so we've been working with local community partners to try to help establish and staff and think about how they should be conceived in terms of setting up Zoom centers in our local community. We also have been working on National Expungement Week projects. So we had a virtual clinic with over 120 people that showed up wanting to talk to attorneys about their criminal records and to try to figure out if they were eligible for expungement and sealing services. And that's a continuing pro bono project that we're having a number of students work on at the moment. other opportunities for sort of interacting with the Center for Social Justice, we have a number of externships, internships, and fellowships that we offer. We're always happy to have students join us in that capacity. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to, work with bright, young legal minds who often bring us new ideas and fresh, innovative approaches to some of these problems, as well as we think it provides a great opportunity for you to join us in this work and really get in on the ground level. And then in addition to all of that, we, as I said before, we're sort of a social justice hub. So we're often having events and conversations and working with others in our community and across campus to address, anything and everything social justice. Because of the intersected nature of this work, and because we have such amazing faculty members with a broad diversity of experience in social justice issues, we're really lucky in that we're able to have a large number of substantive focus areas. Those, if I had to categorize them, they sort of fall into the categories of racial and restorative justice, economic justice, LGBTQ rights, immigrants' rights, civil and human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and pipeline project work, which is trying to support historically underrepresented students who are not traditionally on a path to law school or into the legal profession to get there. And finally, access to justice and technology. So as you'll hear about in just a minute, we're very fortunate to have a deep bench, as you might say, of faculty members who have pursued social justice projects in this area. And so I am happy to answer a couple questions now or talk a little bit more about what we've been doing recently, and then we'll turn it over and get to our speakers tonight. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them into the chat now.
And I was saying before to use the chat feature, but it occurred to me also that we have such a small kind of intimate group this evening that if you wanted to take yourself off mute and turn your camera on and just ask the question, that would be fine as well, I think.
Yes, that would be great, actually. I can see all of you. Okay, so I'll give it a second. You can think about whether you have any questions based on what I've just said. I'll tell you just at the highest level about some recent projects, and then we'll get on to hearing from the speakers tonight. One of the things that we've been doing is obviously pivoting and being responsive to the times. So as soon as COVID-19, was a known entity, we started working on some rapid response legal projects. I think you'll hear about those tonight. Professor Harris Freeman has worked on one, and several other faculty members applied to work with the center on developing these, legal responses to the pandemic. We've also had a number of conferences this fall. That includes the Fair Housing and Civil Rights Conference. We worked with a group called the Springfield Public Forum to bring a speaker for the Gervino Ward LGBTQ speaker series, where we were lucky enough to get Evan Wolfson, who is widely known as the architect of marriage equality and who gave a terrific presentation along with Professor Jennifer Levi about his work and where we are in the movement today and what he sees coming forward. We recently co-hosted an event with a Black Panther Party chairwoman, which was attended by, I think, over 3,000 individuals at this point, and was a fantastic look at, what is the Black agenda today. So those types of conversations are one that we're always having, always looking for, what's new, what's current, what's happening right now. And as you all know, social justice is hopping. So I just feel very fortunate to be here and to be able to work with our faculty and students and staff on these really important issues. So I don't see any questions. Please feel free to turn your video on and let us know if you have them. But with that, I think we'll move on to our first interview, I guess we're going to call them, but our first opportunity to hear from one of our social justice oriented faculty members. And so Professor Levi, I'm going to ask if you would introduce yourself, and then we'll just have a conversation about some of your work.
That sounds great. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So first of all, I just want to thank Ariel so much for the amazing work that she is doing with the Center for Social Justice. And it really has created a hub for the huge breadth of work that we're doing at Western New England. So it's exciting for me to have that structural support for work that I've been doing now for a couple of decades. So just to introduce myself, as Ariel said, I'm Jennifer Levi. I'm on the faculty at Western New England University. I teach constitutional law in the first year. I've also taught contracts in years past, and who knows, could come for me again in the future. And I also teach a class on federal courts. I teach in the areas of sexual orientation, gender identity, and the law, as well as gender in the law. And I teach family law and an upper level family law class that focuses on alternative reproductive technologies. So it's a bit of an introduction in terms of who I am, and I think we'll get more deeper into the work that I do as I talk to Ariel.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in what you would consider sort of social justice initiatives or projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I've been affiliated with an organization called Lgbtq Legal Advocates and Defenders now for just over 20 years. And the acronym for that organization is GLAD, and GLAD is a regionally focused LGBTQ legal nonprofit. So my area of focus has been on transgender rights. That's I would say the core of my scholarship as well as my advocacy. And the work that I do has ranged from litigation to legislation to policy work. And as I said, it has largely emphasized ensuring equality for transgender people across a range of areas. And in particular, some of my most recent focus has been around prison conditions. I've also worked on ensuring both reasonable standards and access for transgender people to change identification documents. And for the last, I don't know, going a little bit more than 3 years, I've been heading up 2 cases, recently filed a third challenging the ban on transgender people in the military. So that's a range of the work that I've done. And I can talk about it in more details, but Ariel, you give me a sense of what would be most helpful at the moment.
Yeah, that would be great. I think we should get into some of that. And also, can you tell us why you got into this area and what motivated you to start working on LGBTQ and transgender rights work?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I will say that this is the work that I went to law school to do. It was kind of between college and law school for me that I came out in a number of different ways, including as a lesbian and as a transgender person. It was also in that period of time that I found myself moving away from what was my paid job in the day, doing actually computer development, and into really advocacy work. And I worked in Massachusetts on getting a non-discrimination law passed, but also really worked on some of the early efforts in particular to develop and expand on local protections for transgender people. And what I found really shortly after I got out of law school is that there were very, very few resources that were really dedicated or focused, for that matter, on doing work to protect the transgender community. There was way less visibility, of course, than there is now. And, you know, just to kind of give students a sense of this, I worked in law firms, I worked in academia, I did a number of different things after law school to really develop the expertise that I eventually wanted to use to, you know, put into this work in a more significant way in the movement. But when I had the opportunity to sort of expand on those interests, I did, but I bring to it a personal passion and connection to the work.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're so lucky to have you here at Western New England University. And for those of you who don't know, Professor Levi is considered like one of the foremost, if not the foremost experts in this area. So you all are also very lucky to be hearing from Jennifer tonight. So
Ariel, I'm sorry, can I just say one other thing though? And that's really nice of you to say that. This area, the Western Massachusetts, has really been like a significant focal point of the work on in the area of sexual orientation and gender identity advocacy, going back to the marriage equality work and plaintiffs who had a connection both to the law school, but also to the community, as well as to, early Massachusetts being a state that adopted protections across a different range of areas really early on in the effort of the work. So, I mean, the area has really drawn some important folks both in the movement, and also has served as sample and examples for other places to look to in expanding on the work.
yeah, and can you talk a little bit about, given today's current climate, I know you said you just filed a new, maybe a third petition against the current president, and maybe you could talk a little bit about either that case or just how you're being responsive to sort of the current moment of today.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that as there has been more visibility around LGBTQ people's lives, there's also been more backlash. And it's, no surprise for folks to hear that there's real division across our country about the direction that the work should go. And certainly in the last 4 years under the Trump administration, we've seen some real significant shifts in policy and interpretation by different federal agencies. So I've been working on some of those efforts to ensure more expansive protections for the community. But with an incoming administration, there's also other kinds of work to do that continues. Again, for me, it will for sure involve litigation, but it will also involve policy work, but it will also involve increased efforts in the states. And, particularly whenever there are changes in perspectives across the federal judiciary, it's just natural that, I don't know if it's natural, but you just see, shifts between or by advocates from federal litigation to state-based litigation. And, the marriage equality work that I have been involved in was an example where early cases really focused on state constitutional law and then eventually shifted to federal constitutional law. And I think we're starting to see that across a range of different areas. So again, this area, this region, both Massachusetts, but also New England, has really served as some important models to the rest of the country. And so I think, there's lots of work to do, and it is really expanding and developing, honestly, in part because of growing support, particularly by families of LGBTQ young people. And so there's just that much more work to do.
Sure. And so given all of that, are there opportunities for students, if they were interested in getting involved, being part of the movement, working with you? What would you suggest to the folks that are listening here tonight of ways that they could get involved if they're interested?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. 3 of the classes that I teach, and I mentioned those: gender in the law, sexual orientation, gender identity in the law, and alternative reproductive technologies, are all classes where we workshop ideas and legal innovations that are connected to cutting edge issues on LGBTQ legal work. So that is, a starting place. And many of my students, really, are just, this semester are diving deeply into the questions that we're talking about, working on papers, helping to do research that's really going to support a lot of the advocacy going forward. I write in this area. I certainly look for students to help support that work, and also really try to connect when I can students to help find internships at other, at nonprofit organizations but also at the different state human rights commissions in the area and different government agencies that are all working in these same areas. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities and it's exciting time. And also just want to mention, as you already did, Ariel, that there is a deep bench on our faculty. Professor Aaron Bazuvas is also very much a national expert, particularly in the area around access to sports and transgender athletes. And Ann Goldstein is an expert and has, I believe her law review was cited by the United States Supreme Court in challenge to the sodomy laws. So there is a real deep bench across this faculty. And actually, Harris, maybe you'll talk about when maybe you're talking about other areas, but I know you've done work representing transgender people in detention. So anyway, yeah, lots of opportunities across the faculty in this particular area.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. So if you have questions specifically for Professor Levi, you could put them in the chat or you could raise your hand and ask them. We'll go ahead, but if you do, we can certainly rewind a bit here. So with that, I'd like to ask Professor Harris Freeman if you would introduce yourself to this group.
Okay, thank you, Ariel. Pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Harris Freeman, as Ariel pointed out, and I've been teaching here at Western New England now for 21 years. And with regard to my work in the arena of social justice, I teach courses in labor law, the rights of union workers and the rights to organize unions are at the core of that class. I also teach a class in employment law, which addresses some of the cutting edge problems that working people are facing in the United States today, problems that are faced by folks like Uber drivers, temp workers, some of the essential frontline workers in agriculture and the economy that we've been reading so much about in the context of the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis that it has brought on. And I also teach a first-year class in legal research and writing. And I also periodically teach a course that sometimes Ariel also teaches here in law and social change. So those are the arenas of academic work that I do. My research interest is largely in the area of workplace law and the rights of contingent and precarious workers. And I'll stop there and let you ask me some questions so we can take this conversation where the director of our Center for Social Justice wants to take it.
Okay, well, that was a great introduction and you sort of touched on some of the different areas, but how about in terms of the specific initiatives that you work on? Professor Levi mentioned one of them and there are several others that I know you've been deeply involved in either starting here or continuing forward. So could you talk a little bit about what some of those are?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I want to start out by saying one thing that I really like about being here with respect to my commitment to social justice is I feel there's a tremendous synergy on the faculty and in the student body for this. It's a place where this is very much at the center of our teaching. It's at the center of the conversations we have in the hallways, the kind of activities that we generate on and off campus. So it's really exciting to be able to teach on a faculty with people like Jennifer, with people, both Jennifers here, both Jennifer Levi and Jennifer Taub, and other faculty who have a deep commitment to work in social justice. So maybe the best thing for me to do is talk about two things that for me sometimes overlap in my interest in social justice. One is my longstanding interest in workers' rights. And the other is something that I've developed an interest in and been organizing around more recently, which is immigration rights. And I'm going to start with the latter. When the Trump administration came into office, immigration lawyers, immigration activists, and people generally concerned about social justice were in tremendous fear that there was going to be a huge number of raids on the immigrant community across the United States, scooping people up in their communities and workplaces. And there was good reason to think that. So in response to that, in this area of Western Massachusetts, where we have lots of immigrants, we also have a big agricultural sector and lots of farm workers, which are largely immigrant workers. There was concern that ICE would be coming down into this area and engaging in all kinds of detentions of immigrant workers and immigrant families. And there are not that many immigration lawyers in the western part of the state. And so we saw an unmet legal need, and a group of immigration lawyers, civil rights lawyers, and criminal defense lawyers banded together under the umbrella of the ACLU to form an immigrant protection project. And we trained lawyers who had no background in immigration law and students for that matter, we involved students in this from the beginning, to represent immigrants who might be picked up and detained by ICE to win their initial release from detention so that they could find lawyers and fight against the efforts of the Trump administration to deport them. And over the course of 3 years, we organized, some 60 or 70 lawyers. We involved over 24 law students here at the law school in various efforts to protect the rights of immigrants throughout the Valley. We worked on safe community ordinances to keep ICE in different ways from being able to access municipal records and municipal police forces and use that information to detain immigrants. We regularly visited the ICE detention center in Western Massachusetts to provide Know Your Rights trainings and to provide pro bono representation to immigrants who were being detained. As this moved along, word got out about our project, and we were invited by organizations on the border who also needed legal help to see if we could engage in a remote effort to collaborate with groups on the border to help immigrants who were in detention there. And one of the major efforts that we engaged in was an effort to free over 24 transgender women from Central America who were detained in ICE detention centers in New Mexico. And we, over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, involved students and lawyers from this area to write all of the pleadings for cases for all these women to get out of detention. And we won their release through a combined effort of students, law students and lawyers here and lawyers on the border. And out of that effort, we continued our effort here to involve ourselves in bringing our resources to the border where immigrant rights resources are in short supply given the need there. And we've been working on a remote detention project throughout much of the Trump administration. Unfortunately, the COVID crisis put that to a temporary end, and we hope to get back to it as we move forward. And hopefully as the administration changes, we can see some change in immigration rights. The other area that I've worked on as a result of that has been the rights of agricultural workers in the area who are largely immigrants. And I've worked both in the courts and now on legislation to try to address some of the unique forms of exploitation that we see in the agricultural economy, particularly in the absurdly low wage that agricultural workers are able to be paid. The minimum wage for agricultural workers in Massachusetts is only $8 an hour. So I'm now working on legislation with a large coalition of advocates in the Western Mass area to provide a change in the law governing the agricultural minimum wage. So that's one way that some of my interests in labor and immigrant rights have overlapped and tied with my teaching, and has brought a lot of law students into this effort over the course of the years.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks. I was only tangentially involved in this immigration protection project by being a volunteer myself, but I have to say it was a terrific project. And interestingly, was a virtual project, as Professor Freeman said, even before the era of COVID-19.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And people could work on it. You know, we were working on the border, but from Springfield, Massachusetts.
Right.
And it was
right,
just,
and very much in real time. I mean, we would write up all of the pleadings. We would get it all ready. It would go to the border, and the next morning, people would be in court on the border, taking the legal work that students here did to win the release of people from ICE detention. It was very gratifying. It was really a worthwhile effort.
yeah. So Professor Taub has a great question, which is, how do students find out about these kinds of projects? I can speak to that from a center perspective, but I wonder if you could also speak about, like, for that particular project, how would students get involved, or how do they get involved generally in this kind of work here?
Yeah, it's a good question. The main way I think students got involved was through various student organizations at the Western New England Law School campus. Students got involved because they were members of the Public Interest Law Association. They were members of the National Lawyers Guild, the Latinx Law Association, the Black Law Students Association. Word got out to these various organizations about these social justice projects. And through that, we recruited volunteers. We've regularly held all kinds of training sessions for students to orient them to these projects. And even now, one of the big things we do on campus is we're now, as a law school, providing all of the intake workers for the ACLU in Western Massachusetts. So students are the people taking all the calls that are coming in for problems with police misconduct, violations of individual rights. And it's really been a collaborative relationship between the faculty and now the Center for Social Justice and various student organizations who are sort of keeping each other in the loop about what's going on, generating ideas and projects. And it's been really, really effective. Just this fall, we held the virtual 14th annual Fair Housing and Civil Rights Conference sponsored by the law school and other civil rights and fair housing organizations in the area. And students were involved in helping coordinate workshops. Some students planned workshops on eviction issues. We had faculty involved in presenting these, and we had, over the course of 2 days, hundreds and hundreds of participants from the region joining us in this. So it feels kind of organic at this point to get involved. And of course, the other way to get involved is through clinics and externships that can connect students to faculty and lawyers in the community who are providing mentoring and clinical teaching on various areas of social justice lawyering.
Yep, those are all good points. We also have a weekly newsletter blast that goes out to the whole law school community. And so when we have different opportunities like this pop up, that will be in the Monday or Tuesday morning newsletter that goes out to all students. So that's a way to get information. I sometimes send special opportunity emails out to the student body, and we also have a Center for Social Justice website, which is in the process of being updated, but has information on sort of how you can get involved in an opportunity. So lots of different ways. If you want to be involved, there's lots of different ways.
Yeah, one other thing I just want to say about social justice lawyering right now, we are living in trying and difficult times. It is trying and difficult to do anything right now, whether it be to go to work or go to school. Everything takes an extra effort. So kudos to all of you who want to go to law school. But what we are really trying to do is to make this as exciting as possible. And the opportunities for social justice lawyering have never been greater. These are the times when social justice lawyers are really made. They don't get made in good times, they get made in hard times. And so the opportunities to do extraordinary things are in front of us right now. And that's true whether it be in immigrant rights, labor rights, in LGBTQ rights, or other issues that we are working on in the area. And what Professor Levi said about the area being important for LGBTQ rights, it's also a hotbed of activism on a whole range of social justice issues. And I think that the law school is very much in the center of that and what's going on here. And it's been a wonderful place to work and teach in this arena.
That's great. Thanks, Harris.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ariel. So it's been a pleasure working with you this past year.
Yes, thank you. For me as well. Harris is one of my two mentors at the Center for Social Justice, and he's been an incredible advisor to me throughout my time here. I'm relatively new. I started in March in this position, and so he has certainly helped me personally and the center along the way. All right, so if you have any questions for Professor Freeman, please feel free to ask them now or put them in the chat. But with that, we'll move along to Professor Taub, who I had the pleasure of having a public conversation like this about a little over a month and a half ago now. It's crazy that it's been that long, but Professor Taub recently published a book. It's called Big Dirty Money: The Shocking Injustice, oh, there it is, an unseen cost of white collar crime. And if you don't already follow her on Twitter or Facebook, you should. She has one of the best commentaries and feeds that I've ever seen, and I so enjoy following her and liking her different posts. I'm sure she'll talk about it a bit here today. But Professor Taub, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and just introduce yourself to the group.
So hi, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Despite the understandable technology snafus, these things happen all the time. And I'm new to the law school, and what attracted me to Western New England is even before the Center for Social Justice was launched, the lawyers here who make that commitment, who want to use law in, as the power of law for good. And when I went to, so let me tell you sort of a bit about my philosophy and maybe something about myself, I don't know. But when I went to law school back in the 1990s, I went to law school thinking that law itself could be a tool for social change. The people I looked up to were the people who came before me. To me, Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, it's something you can really revisit over and over again. But I looked at the litigation that came out of the civil rights movement. I looked at again that I believed that the right court cases and the right legal changes would help push the society along, right? Helped bend the arc. And I think recently I've come to believe, and it's funny that Ariel mentions Twitter and Facebook, I've come to believe that instead of law being a tool for social change, things like social media and social movements actually is being the real tools for legal change. And I think that maybe these things are interrelated, obviously, but we can look at movements, and it's movements. We can think about this summer, and finally, after, has it been 10 years? I don't know how many years, but finally Black Lives Matter has its moment. Where people finally, I shouldn't say people who didn't get it, right? Maybe the majority of white people who didn't understand what Black Lives Matter was doing. I think this summer with the, on the street murder of George Floyd for what was accusations of just an economic offense of passing off a fake currency, to watch that. It wasn't that moment that changed everyone's mind. It was all the work, all the many years. And for me, I've seen that in my own work. So I'm kind of one of these nerdy sort of, former corporate lawyers who really is interested in fraud and white collar crime. I do all this kind of follow the money stuff. I'm really interested on what makes really powerful people crooked and corrupt and how we can stop that, right? So that's kind of been my focus. And I got into that after the financial crisis, when the banks were all bailed out and ordinary people lost their houses. I'm really interested in the intersection of money and injustice. But again, until the Trump administration, I was not a Twitter person or much of a Facebook person. I wasn't really anyone other than just a normal former corporate lawyer who'd become a law professor and wrote articles that nobody reads. And I'd written a book that not many people read. But I was really interested in trying to share these ideas I had about change with people in power. So I was the kind of person who would be invited to testify before a congressional committee, like, that kind of thing. And then, but I always admired, people who were doing movement work, but I never saw myself as that kind of person. And everything changed for me right before Trump got elected. I had known enough about him because I'd been studying white collar crime for a long time to know he was a crook. And I'd read enough about his connections with organized crime and his RICO and his fake universities. I could just go on and on. I mentioned some of this in my book, but this guy was a complete con artist, and I couldn't believe, I was so disappointed that he was elected. I guess, by the way, I'm not going to hide my views on anything. That's not what I do. If they have a long history of being a con man or con artist, I don't care what political party they're in, I'm going to say it. And so it bothered me and what bothered me almost the most was he wasn't going to show his tax returns. When it came to the economic stuff, obviously his racism, his misogyny, all that other stuff bothered me. But when again, remember, I'm a follow the money person, and he wasn't letting us see his tax returns. And so out of the blue, the day I had gone to the Women's March in Boston, I almost didn't go, but it was actually my husband who made me go. I thought, I'd always been a feminist for a long time, but then I sort of forgot about my activism. And he dragged me to the Women's March, and I was so inspired by it. The next morning, I put a tweet out to not many followers at the time saying, why don't we have a tax march on April 15th? I looked up and it was going to be a Saturday. And, that sounds like the dumbest idea in the world, and no one would listen to it. And then I put my phone down and had breakfast, and like within 24 hours, this thing had blown up. I've never had anything like this happen. I almost had a heart attack, because it turns out that I was suddenly, and through my connecting with people all over the country, within a few days, we were starting to organize a march on Washington, marches in hundreds of cities. I was on Slack. I was like, hanging out with all the cool kids who are 20 years younger than me in Washington. And we did it almost all virtually, right? This is before COVID. That's how anything gets done. I did fly down to DC a few times. So I went from being this kind of, I thought, somewhat respectable, kind of nerdy academic who could testify before Congress, to somebody who was like launching a GoFundMe to order a giant inflatable chicken balloon that mocked Trump, from China. That was me, and unfortunately, a lot of people think that's who I am, but you can hear me talking. I'm not actually that fun or interesting, but on Twitter I am, right? That's what Ariel says. So what I came to find out through all this process is it's really nice to meet, and through Tax March, I met some real, some serious activists, people who had done Occupy Wall Street, multiracial, multicultural group, the kind of people that I would work with in law school back in my activist days, but who I got distant from. And anyway, I guess I'm talking a lot too much here. I guess the question I guess I would say, if I had, is how I can bring some of this stuff to the law school. And I'd like to figure out projects where students can get involved. I mean, to me, the way to get involved in some of this stuff, it sounds kind of boring, but through the notice, it's called the notice and comment process. When all the stuff that affects us, and this is where social activism actually helps, and I've worked on this before, when Congress passes a law, the nitty gritty is left to the agencies. And they put out these proposed rules that could affect our lives. And it could be the Environmental Protection Agency. It could be the Securities it could be the Securities Exchange Commission, which is putting out the rules that affect whether investors get cheated. And they put out a proposed rule, and it's amazing. A lot of activist organizations organize letters and help ordinary people write comments in. Things like you guys may focus on net neutrality, this thing with the Federal Communications Commission about internet access, stuff like that. It turns out real people send in a lot of comments, but so do bots. Right. And I think my next effort is going to be to try to encourage students and young people to get involved in the comment process, but also to demand that all the fake letters that are coming in generated by computers that aren't real, that all the agencies have to discard those, not post those, and so on. So my idea of activism, again, is kind of this weird intersection of like, let's hit the streets and not go home until we get what we want. And then also, but let's figure out how to use the levers of power to make change. And I think we have to do both. And that's what I think is fun. And I'm hoping, I just joined the law school this fall, but when I can, I'm hoping to, get students excited about those kinds of things. So thanks, Ariel.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. All right, any questions for Professor Taub? Please let us know. As you can see, she tells it like it is, and she'll definitely give you an answer. And she'll be right on top of it. So feel free to throw out any questions. We will also move along to our law student on tonight's event. Harvey, would you introduce yourself to the group?
Hi, everybody. My name is Harvey Pullen. I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm a 3L.
Thanks, Harvey. Tell us a little bit about both your interest in social justice and any projects that you've been involved with during your time at Western New England.
I'm interested in social justice because I like to see that people have access to the law, and sometimes some communities don't have access. And right now, what I'm working on is a consumer debt problem. And basically, the client he had a debt that he owed some creditors. He owed a debt to some creditors, and he wasn't able to pay that off. And so the creditors put a lien on his property. And so after he paid this debt off, the creditors still have not released the property, still have not taken the lien off the property. And so right now we're in the process of working on getting the lien removed. So that's the current initiative I'm involved in right now.
Yes, and it's a highly unusual case that I'm working on with Harvey. So we've had to pull in some experts and a private law firm to join us, and the issues in the case are currently going up on appeal in the Massachusetts court system, and had solicited amicus briefs this year on this question of whether or not creditors can attach somebody's property in a debt situation when there is protection on the home. There's something in Massachusetts called a Homestead Act Protection, and it protects the equity in your home up to a certain level. There's an automatic protection, and then there's even an additional protection. Our client had the full protection on his home, and yet, even though he had paid off his debt, after paying it off, the creditors attached his property, and not only that, brought him into court the last day of the pre-pandemic court shutdown. So March 13th, they went to his house with a capias warrant, which is a civil arrest warrant, and brought him into court despite the fact that he had already paid off the debt. He didn't owe anything, and his wife suffers from some really serious health impairments, and it was incredibly risky for him to be like out at that time and in the courthouse and among all those people. So for that reason, he has what we think is a really good affirmative case of Fair Debt Collection Practices Act violations and 93A state violations and other claims. And so Harvey has been terrific in helping us investigate this case. Can you tell them a little bit about what you did in terms of your investigation skills?
Yeah, basically, I just had to compare the statute, as you just said, the FDCPA statute, just trying to compare that statute to the facts of the case, and just trying to see what it really happened, see how we can kind of pigeonhole the statute into what actually happened to him during when he had to keep his police called him in, and just trying to show that he was affected by this.
And so Harvey actually went not undercover investigation, but he actually contacted the local sheriff's office and got what will probably be a critical piece of evidence in the case. Do you want to tell them about that?
Yeah, so basically the creditor basically said that they had sent a recall of capias, which basically means that once the capias was placed out, they actually sent a letter to the sheriff's department saying that don't use this capias, recall the capias. We don't need it right now. But when I called and spoke with the sheriff's department, there's no record of that recall capias, and so we don't have them on record saying it. But I guess in the further, once we start the process more, we'll have a subpoena and try to have them on record saying then they receive the recall of capias. So that's kind of the main part of the case, which we can show that they messed up.
Yeah, it's a critical piece of evidence. And so Harvey was able to get that for us by contacting the sheriff and interviewing them. And who knows, if they won't give us the same kind of statement, Harvey, we may put you on the stand. So in terms of working, you've been working with the Center for Social Justice on that. You've also worked on a couple other projects. And have you done other kinds of public interest social justice work while you've been at the law school?
I did a prior project with you, kind of when the coronavirus thing really set off, the pandemic started, like in March. We did people were getting evicted basically because they couldn't pay their rent payments, and so the eviction happens, and then when the pandemic started, so I worked with you trying to get these evictions stopped, get them stayed, and so I did that, and also I did a call center with Professor Harris. We did the ACLU call center. People call in and just trying to describe their problems to what interaction to have the police try to solve that for them.
Great. It sounds like you've had a pretty diverse range of experiences there between eviction and ACLU hotline and the consumer case. That's fantastic. Since we have prospective students on this call tonight, I'm wondering if you have any tips for them, students who are likely, were in your shoes a couple years back. Do you have any recommendations for students that are interested in social justice and are heading off to law school in the near future?
Definitely keep tabs in your email, because that's when a lot of the opportunities will come up. So make sure you check your email frequently. And once you see an opportunity that you like, just go ahead and contact the professor or the person coordinating that. Just introduce yourself and just try to tell them you want to be a part of what's going on. And once you do that, do a good job. And then once you do a good job, you're able to connect again with the person.
Yeah, that's great. So it looks like we have about 10 minutes left in the program as scheduled. I'm wondering if anyone that's on has any questions. It looks like we have, all the faculty members are still here. If you have a particular question or if you just want to talk about social justice generally. Does anyone have any questions, any concerns about social justice? Anybody want to talk about what's going on in the world?
While we're waiting for the first question to come in, I just wanted to say, Harvey, I had to triple check that you're a 3L. I swear that you were at orientation just last year. I thought you were a 2L, but time flies by. But such is the life of the admissions officer. We bring you guys into the school, we see you at orientation week, and then we get to check in with you here or there. And before we know it, you're 3Ls and doing all these, amazing things with the Center for Social Justice, and about to leave us in less than a year's time. So kudos to you for your involvement with the Center for Social Justice.
Thank you.
Yeah, Harvey's been a terrific help in a number of different projects. Really fantastic.
Ariel?
Yeah.
Can I also say one other thing about social justice lawyering? A lot of things that I know Professor Taub and Levi and I have talked about are all things that are done either in thinking in the classes where you learn some of these basic principles of law, or are extracurricular activities that students are involved in. But I just wanted for a minute to plug the fact that we have a whole range of activities that you get credit for that are deeply connected to social justice lawyering. We have students that are working in the public defender's office, representing criminal defendants at arraignment and at trial while they're in law school. We have students working at the Mass Commission Against Discrimination who handle anti-discrimination law. They work at the Fair Housing Center doing civil rights law in these arenas. And there are so many ways to get your hands on social justice work for credit, as well as taking advantage of these various extracurricular initiatives that the law school has. So there are so many ways to learn about and touch social justice at the law school. And, I would, encourage those of you who are interested in social justice lawyering to learn about this before you get to law school. So when you get here, you can hit the ground running. 3 years actually goes rather fast. And there are so many different opportunities in front of you. It's good to be thoughtful about it, to go knock on a professor's door when you have a question, or maybe knock on their Zoom room door these days, and have a conversation with them about how to get involved and to learn about their experiences and to present your own ideas to them about where you're trying to go with your own legal career in social justice.
Can I just jump in too and say, I totally agree with Professor Freeman. And when I was in law school, the two most rewarding things I did were the two clinical experiences I had. One was, it was this thing called trial advocacy, and you learn how to try cases, I guess. And then you also got a clinic, and I did a clinic for people with AIDS. And I learned how to, the work we were doing is writing wills and doing bankruptcy work. And then I also represented, I saw someone speak on a panel. This is like, there was an email maybe and there was an announcement, probably an announcement then and not an email, but announcement about a panel about women and lawyers who represented women in prostitution. And I wanted to do that. And there was no specific clinical offering. And I went to the guy who was head of the clinical program and asked him, would he sign off on this thing for me to do just with this lawyer in Boston? And at first he said no. And I didn't take no for an answer. You shouldn't take no for an answer, right? I said, you know, I kind of whined a little bit saying, you want us to be active and to help people, but here I came up with my project and you won't approve it. Within 3 seconds after that, he said, fine, you know? And it was one of the, again, it's so rewarding, and it's what Harvey's doing. Having real clients gets you to understand the problems on the ground. And then later, as you get older, you can step back and not just do one-on-one with clients, but also think about the big picture changes that you want to put in place. I'm someone who thinks you've got to really meet people first to understand things before you can do the big picture. Others can maybe do one or the other, but I encourage you to get involved.
Great. I do see in the chat that Victoria D has a couple of good questions. First, when can you begin participating in extracurricular activities or projects? And also, how many of the projects require 303 certification? Which of our panelists would like to hop in to answer those?
Well, I'll start and maybe others can also jump in. So for those of you who don't know what 303 certification is, once you're in law school and you've taken a class in professional responsibility and evidence, you have the ability, according to the rules of the courts of Massachusetts, to practice and represent clients in court under the supervision of a practicing attorney. And to do that, we have a number of clinics that require it. For example, if you're going to participate in the criminal law clinics, both on the prosecution or defense side, you need to be 303 certified. But to do other work in front of administrative bodies, you don't need to be 303 certified necessarily. We have students who work in housing court, for example, that requires 303 certification representing indigent individuals who are being subject to eviction orders by their landlords. But like the project that I initiated involving students and representing immigrants in detention, that did not require 303 certification. And we had students in their second year of law school and in their first year of law school helping in various ways on the project. And we had a number of students who represented clients before the immigration court once they had the background and experience to do so. So while some direct representation in court does require that kind of coursework to precede your involvement, there's a whole range of other activities that are core lawyering activities that doesn't require that. For example, like when Harvey was talking about working on the ACLU hotline and talking to clients and getting their story, it's a fundamental lawyering skill. You have to be a good listener. And the ACLU is very reliant on students here to make sure they get people's stories correct so they can go on and figure out what kind of problems they have and whether they're deserving of representation. So there's really, I think, a continuum of practical lawyering skills that move from some of the more basic to some of the more complicated as you move through law school.
And in terms of the first question that was asked, there are activities that you don't need 303 certification for, such as the Consumer Debt Project that Harvey just talked about and that I'm running here through the center. You actually don't even need to be a lawyer in order to be an advocate in the small claims session of the district court here. And so it's a fantastic project because students can do everything all the way up until to arguing in front of the clerk magistrates because they are just clerk magistrate hearings. And so there's no 303 certification required. I have a number of 1Ls that have been involved in Center for Social Justice projects throughout the year. Let's see. Okay, those were really good questions, Victoria. Anyone want to ask a final question as we wrap up our program tonight? If you do have questions, both Anthony and I have put our emails into the chat. feel free to reach out. If you have admissions questions, you can contact Anthony. He's a terrific resource and he will shepherd you throughout the entire process. If you have center or social justice questions, or you want to connect with any of the faculty that were here tonight, reach out to me and I'll be sure to connect you. So thank you again so much for joining us, especially given the circumstances this evening. Thank you for hanging in there with us and being here tonight. We appreciate you for joining. Thanks to all the panelists and speakers here tonight too.
Good night, everybody.